SpeakUp Podcast. Same room, same chair, same city, same virus going around, different host. Tens of podcasts, guest after guest after guest has been on here sharing their insight, stories, some laughs. But now it's Aaron Daniels' turn to speak up.
That's me, man.
That's you. Here we are. Was that too scripted? Was that too rigid? Or was that?
Listen, man, you didn't read anything, so I know it wasn't an Easter speech. So that means you got
just in my mind.
Photographic memory,
something like that. Improvisational skills.
Right. Yeah, man. So I'm already having a blast talking to you, man. So
hey, always a good time.
At this point, I'm yours.
All right, sweet. So I obviously, wanted to take things my own direction, but didn't want to, take too much away from the speak up flair that you got going on. So I wanted to start off with a few quick hitters, how you usually do.
Right.
So most traumatic memory. No, I'm playing. I'm not gonna have you start with that.
Hey, listen, I was getting ready to have to go to a deep dark place.
Would you rather lose your ability to see or lose your ability to both hear and taste?
Man, listen, I gotta have my sight. I feel like I can compensate for the absence of those other two senses better than I could for my sight. So give me my eyes, go ahead, take away my ears, and I say this reluctantly, but take away the taste too, because I'm a foodie, man. So as long as I'm awake,
you could really though eat so healthy and so strict, all this these vegan diets, like eating tree bark, whatever it is, like the leaves off the trees,
right?
All that good stuff, and you don't even have to doesn't matter that it doesn't taste good at all.
My body would be a temple like I've always imagined it, but see that taste is a curse because of what you just said, man. Oh yeah, dog. But yeah, eyes. Give me my eyes.
Would you rather lose your ability to lie or believe everything you hear?
You know what? I'm going to get rid of my ability to lie. And I'm going to be honest, I got to give some context to that, because just so the listeners and the viewers don't think that I'm a liar, man. Listen, I clown and I joke all the time, and my boy Creed Flowers, he always would say, man, listen, he said, you just lying, but you always say you're just playing. Playing is a softer word, you know what I mean? Now, here's the difference. Synonym. If I tell a lie and I leave it, that's a lie. But if I tell you some BS, but before you leave out of my presence, I reveal to you, no, I'm just joking, man. I'm just playing. Yeah. You see what I mean? So I guess I'll get rid of that before I just believe everything. That may be one of the worst things you could do.
I would ask you Spotify or Apple Music, but I already know you're on the wrong side of that, so it's all good.
Fair enough. Yeah, I am an Apple Music user as of today, but you never know, man. Time breeds change.
Try it out.
I might have to.
And then two rapper comparisons for you. So Future or 2 Chainz?
I'm going to go with the person that I've listened to the most out of those two, and that'd have to be 2 Chainz.
Okay, I think I'm with you there. And then Wayne or Jay-Z?
Got to go with Hove, man.
Okay, that's where we disagree, but that's all good.
I feel that, man. That's
you can't really go wrong.
That's a quality comparison right there. But both sets of those artists are quality, man. It wasn't. I know I may have answered it kind of quickly, but in my mind, I actually had to do.
If you know.
Yeah, for real. So nicely done, my friend.
All right, so I kind of want to just kind of go through just from the first page all the way to the last page. But first off, just want to briefly mention and talk about you being the head coach of Central High in Tulsa. Just congratulations first off, and this express, how does that feel? Man, it's here, it's official. That's you.
That's me, man. Thank you for that, first of all. But it's one of those deals, because somebody asked me this the other day, and I guess you can say that I've always had the thought in my mind, but it wasn't an active pursuit to where as soon as I graduated from Central back in 2007, it wasn't like I was thinking, man, one day I'm coming back and I'm going to take over the pro. No, but it was a thought that was in the back of my mind, man, wouldn't it be cool, since I knew I wanted to coach at that point?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be cool if I one day had the opportunity to come back to where the quote unquote dream manifested? Because it was during my high school days that I determined that I wanted to coach basketball for a living. And it had everything to do with my high school coach at the time. Just the way he ran his program, the way he, how captivating of a personality he was. And his name is Terry Scott. He's retired now, but he's a 3-time state champion. And he's one of those guys that you're going to hear him before you see him. But he was a hell of a storyteller. And he had a way of getting to everybody and getting everybody to believe the same thing. And when we talk about, you hear terms like buy-in, he was a master at getting all different types of personalities, people from different walks of life, to all believe in the same goal and be on one accord, at least for that 90 minutes to 2 hours that we're together. Yeah. Now, whenever we disperse, you're on your own. And so I was just enamored at all of that. And I was like, you know what? If I can have this type of influence one day through the vehicle, which is basketball, that I love, I said, I want to do that.
What was it, if you remember, specifically for you, that made it easy to buy in, or what was it that he did for you particularly? Because for each player, depending on, personality or where they feel they stand on the team,
Sure.
Egos, people
Right.
are going to need, different buttons pushed. But what was that for you?
To me, on a personal level, he was easily approachable. You see, because when you're a kid, especially when you're a little kid, like elementary age, but even throughout, once you get to your teenage years, at least for me, I still sort of had grown-ups on a pedestal, meaning that I didn't necessarily look at them as humans all the time. It wouldn't even be a conscious thought that, okay, this person is actually a person.
Authority figure.
Yes, yeah. I'm like authority figure, then human. That's what I was. Yeah. That was the order.
Listen, do.
Yes,
just be.
But he was so relatable in a sense, and you could go talk to him. He wouldn't be short with you or make you feel like you were small, even though I was a freshman, obviously, like everybody else when you start high school. Mm-hmm. And the stigma a lot of times with underclassmen is that you sort of have to eat a bunch of crap early on until you quote unquote pay your dues. But I never felt like I was being put through the ringer like that with Coach. And plus he would always reach first and be engaging me, and I'm a talker myself. So next thing you know, here I am having a dialogue with somebody that's 40 years older than me, and we kicking it like we're the same age. But the respect was always there.
Yeah.
So that's what did it for me.
And you said it was something that kind of maybe was in the back of your mind, but not something you had been actively thinking about this whole entire time.
Right.
At what point did you kind of see that door start to crack open? You see the light shine through, maybe let's explore this. At what point did you realize that door might be open?
Now you're talking about the door to go back to Central?
Yeah.
It literally happened. Well, no, let me take it back. You actually tapped into something else that I forgot.
That's my job, man.
But yeah, you're good, man. But some months ago, and when I say months ago, I really think, if I'm not mistaken, it was before the new year. So toward the latter part of 2019, I was having a conversation with somebody, and they sort of gave me a tip, if you will, that the Central job might be opening up after this season. And I was like, okay. And you always take those kind of things with a grain of salt, because I've seen things happen the way I was told they would, and then I've seen things go in the complete opposite direction. So I was like, okay, well, that's cool. It could be coming open. The Central coach could be moving on, because it was known unofficially or officially, depending on how tapped in you were, that the Booker T head coach at the time, which was Conley Phipps, was going to be moving on after this season. So that was well known throughout the basketball community, throughout the coaching community. And so the rumblings was that Eli Brown, now the former head boys basketball coach at Central, was going to be one of the favorites for that Booker T job. But I was like, okay, well, sounds good. And obviously the wheels start to turn a little bit when you hear something like that. But I'm still in season, and I've gotten better throughout my last few adult years of being present, just being in the moment, not trying to think too far ahead to where I'm missing out on what's in front of me. And so I'm at Millwood at the time with Coach Jeffries, and we're, ranked number 1 in 3A all season long, with a hell of an opportunity to go win state. So we think. So that's where my mind was. So, we fast forward all these months, and it's like it's early June, and it comes public that, Eli Brown leaves Central to head for Booker T. And so now it's not just a potential thing. It's a real possibility at this point. And, I'm getting hit up in the DMs. I'm getting hit up, via text through by a lot of guys that I went to school with. Either I played with them or I played against them at other schools. Even a few of the faculty and staff that were there teaching and working during my era, some of them are still there. And so I heard from a few of them too, like, hey man, are you going to apply? You're going to apply? Some people are asking me, other people are telling me, go get that. And so I'm caught in the cross at that point, because I like Oklahoma City, which is where I still am for the moment. And I'm like, man, all I've done in the last 5 years is just move. And if you've been through that process, you know what a pain in the ass it can be. But, I pondered it for long enough, and I told myself, listen, I'm going to wait until I feel the same way 2 consecutive days. And then I'll make my move or not make my move, depending on how I feel. Yeah, that's patience. Huge. And I'm not always the best at that, but
it's hard.
It is. But one day it just hit me that, man, listen, one thing that Coach Scott, my high school coach, always tells me, still my greatest mentor to this day, by the way, that opportunities come and go, but this one may not ever come again. Hate to get cheesy, but those were the words ringing in my mind. So I said, you know what? To hell with it, man. Whether I have to move or whatever I got to do, this is home. This is where I made a name for myself as a player and built a lot of my reputation. And what better way to get myself back in the saddle as a head coach and really start to try and define my career than going back to the crib. So I shot for it and I got it.
It's not bragging because I'm asking you, but like, why are you like the man for this job?
I think I am the man for this job for a culmination of reasons. And that's not to disrespect anybody else that was applying.
Of course.
Because there were some solid applicants that put in for this job with resumes a little more decorated than mine. But a combination of being relatively young. I'm just 31 years old, right? I'm unmarried, no children. No knock to those who have that, but that just spells a whole bunch of time that I have to devote to building this program. And me being a product of Tulsa, born and raised, all right, and then going to Central, obviously, like I've said 1,000 times, being a part of a state championship team back in 2006, and just, being a part of the fabric of that institution. It just made sense, man. It just made sense. And, I got the feeling that I'm heavily supported by a lot of the alumni from years before me, from years after me. And we're going to try to do what we can do to be impactful. But that, in a nutshell, would be the reason why I would advocate for me to be in the spot that I'm in,
Well, you're here, so.
Yeah.
What goes into putting together, like, your crew or your assistant coaching staff? Like, What kind of thoughts go into that? Like, how does that whole process kind of unfold? Do you have much, like, power and dictation choosing that? Or was that something that was kind of talked about as you were going into this process already set? That's
a great question because every place does it differently. This will be my third stint as a head coach, and my last two, I didn't have as much say so in that regard as I do now. Because when I was at Piedmont, luckily it worked out. Luckily when I got the job at Piedmont back in August 2016, there was a good friend of mine and a fellow coworker of mine who was already there. He was as a softball coach, Coleman Hughes the third. You know what I mean? And he's an older cat. He's got 20 years on me, and I felt real secure having somebody who had been there and done that by my side to sort of help a young guy out and keep me on track, right?
Yeah, so kind of steady the ship if things got a little wobbly.
Exactly, or at least to put some nuggets of information on my brain so I can, lead us in the right direction. So I had Coach Hughes already there. And then another young man by the name of Jacob Maloney, all right? He was already at Piedmont, and he had just finished, I think, his second year as an assistant coach there. And he's a Piedmont kid, born and bred, so he knows the community knows him. And he was already ingratiated with those boys in the program, which would, I had a feeling that would help me seamlessly transition into the community. And he'll, help me figure out the who's who of the town, who I need to know, and what I need to know about my personnel before, because they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So you got to, he helped me out. He helped me figure those guys out. And he knows his stuff. Both of those guys do, him and Hughes. Last but not least, the X factor was Creed Flowers. And he was, he's a kid. He's grown now, but he's from Tulsa like me, a couple of years younger than me. He had just started his coaching career in Muskogee, Oklahoma, at Muskogee High School, shortly after his playing days at Bacone. And he ended up as a free agent, just for lack of a better term, around maybe October of 2016. And so that was the last piece to the puzzle. And him being a friend of mine, just a personal friend, I'm like, listen, if I can help this cat not spend a whole year out of the business, I want to do that. So I reached out to him and I put an invitation on the table for him to come on out here to Oklahoma City and help me on my staff at Piedmont. And he thought about it for maybe a couple of hours. I told him to take a day, but he hit me like 2 hours later and said, I'm coming. So, he came on out this way, and now I got Creed Flowers, Coleman Hughes, Jacob Maloney. We're all in this thing together, and that was a hell of a staff, dog. But I got to pick just one. Those other two pieces just worked out.
Yeah.
Then second stop, Tecumseh. That's a little further from where I live, so I knew I wasn't going to be as rooted in terms of people that I know in that area. So I was sort of given. I was given Dalen Qualls and Alan Brewer. I didn't know those guys, but those young dudes are workers, though, man. We got to know each other. We worked well together, I thought. I mean, both of them are at least 3 to 5 years younger than me. They're hungry. They know their stuff. They got playing experience. And I was looking around like, yo, this is pretty cool. We got a staff of 3 guys under 30 getting after it.
Energy.
But again, they weren't my selections. Who's to say that I wouldn't have chosen them, though? You see? Now I'm at Central, and I've been given autonomy, for lack of a better word, to pick my own staff. And I'm talking about from assistant number 1 to however many I feel like I need, as long as we can pay them. you know? And so I've come up with two guys that I played ball with. Chris Watson, you know, he was class of 2008 coming out of Central. And Wayne Jackson, who was a class of 2007 with me, also out of Central. We won a state championship together back in 2006, all three of us. And then another young man by the name of Ryan Devers. He graduated from Central in 2011. He's an all-stater. You know what I'm saying? So him, and then good friend of mine, Trey McVeigh. He's out of Muskogee. You know, he specializes in health and wellness. He's got a body like a Greek god. You know what I mean? So I definitely had to hit him up and say, hey man, do you mind coming and being my strength and conditioning coach? And he has told me he would love that. So now we're gonna figure out a way to pay him, and we're gonna go, man. So that's how it's been for me. I know I gave you the long spiel, but no, that's what it was.
So when we talk about like giving someone the keys, like they gave you the keys.
They did.
Like you said, autonomy. Mm-hmm. How were those decisions like pretty easy ones for you? Had you kind of had in mind like those were guys you wanted to bring on?
Yeah, it didn't take very long. It didn't take very long at all. I just sat and pondered the idea. Because, see, once you've been in the business for a little while like I have, not a long time, but long enough to know what types of questions you may hear when you go into an interview.
Yeah.
And I wanted to have some answers for those potential questions. And one of those questions I figured I would get was that, hey, have you given any thought to who you're going to hire on your staff? And sure enough, it came. And I could have thrown some names out there willy-nilly without even asking these guys first, but I wanted to make sure that I had some guys on the hook who verbally committed to me so that I could take their names into that room with the big wigs and be speaking with some credibility.
And then they know that you're already about it. Like you've already talked to these people.
Sure.
You've already like tried to plant those seeds. It's all a matter of them opening the door for you to bring them in with you.
Absolutely, man. And it wasn't, you know, I played with a lot of guys, and a lot of those players are good players, but you know, I had to narrow down the list, so to speak, and it was a combination of, okay, who do I know based on my time playing with them and based on our conversations, who has that mind that I'm looking for? Because it's a little different. And just because you play the game at a high level doesn't mean you can coach it.
Yeah.
Right. And so I've thought about that, and also thought about, okay, who's in the business now who sort of has who have the pulse, so to speak. They have an idea of the landscape of coaching nowadays, and just relating to the modern day kid, if you will.
Yeah.
Even though we all fit in the term modern day, but more modern. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? So I came up with the list that I came with, and I'm pretty faithful that we'll be able to put our best foot forward and make a good effort out here.
It's kind of like choosing like your groomsmen for a wedding. Like so many deserving people, but you can only have, a select group over there next to you.
So much, you know. But then again, I won't act like I got it all the way right, because the wheels could fall off the wagon in a couple of months. You never know. I always look at things on both sides, but I'm confident that we'll be fine.
You talked about how your coach in high school, what was his name again?
Terry Scott. You
talked about how he kind of got you all to buy in. And it reminds me of this book I read by, I believe it's Seth Davis, college basketball writer. It's called Getting to Us. And it's a book that talks about, Coach K, Tom Izzo, Dabo Swinney, Doc Rivers, just how these coaches get all these individuals into us. Like how do you go about that process? Because everyone does it differently, and that's what I learned as I read this book. Like there are a million different ways to get from individuals to a collective.
Right.
What's the approach you have? What have you found works for that?
A couple of things that I found work for that. Number one is building an individual rapport with each and every one of your guys or your girls, if that's who you coach. Because early in my career, I would approach it thinking that I could treat everybody the same way and just use this all-purpose approach to communication, and it wasn't working. And when I say it wasn't working, it's not that I was met with a bunch of resistance and kids were being combative. It wasn't that. It was, I was noticing that a kid was not giving me everything he had or she had, or I just had this inclination that this kid's got more in them than what they're giving me. And I was like, how can I tap into that? Or how can I get them to tap into that? And so my conversation and my tone, my delivery, all of that changed a little bit. And I was going through that process so much so to where I had to look back and go, okay, dang, I noticed that I'm having to go through all this for this kid, but it's a little easier with this kid. And so now, before I knew it, I was treating them differently, and not in a bad way. It's like what works for you may not work for him. So I got to take the time to figure out how that looks. And so that's one way. And another way is, I think you got to put kids in a fight or flight situation every now and again, and it's hard to do it sometimes because in today's instant gratification climate and, where kids get pacified a lot, a lot of times their parents they're quick to jump in front of the bullet for them. You know what I'm saying? And not let them go through weather those storms and fight through some adversity. But whenever you have a kid who doesn't have that issue, if you put them in that position to where they have to think that, okay, damn, this is how coach is. He's been this way for a couple weeks or for a couple months. So obviously it's not going to change.
Yeah.
So now I got to figure out, am I going to conform to what he wants, or is this too much for me and I'm going to quit? And either one of those is fine. But I think the earlier, like if you have a quitter in your ship, the quicker you identify who that is, the quicker he or she decides to walk, the better. Because if you start investing a lot of time and energy and trusting them with some responsibility, like giving them stock in your program, and then you press them too hard, instead of quitting in October before you really get started, now they quit on you in February.
Yeah.
And now the loss is greater because of how much you've put into that kid.
Yeah, you got to fill that hole. You got to build that kid up.
Right. And another way, the last thing I'll say that you can really get the respect of all of your guys is when you jump your best player's ass just as hard as anybody, matter of fact, harder than every
standard.
Exactly. Everybody else knows that, okay, if he'll do him like that, I don't stand a chance. And so they all know coach means business. There's no favoritism. There's no partiality. And I think I'll buy into what this dude is selling kind of deal.
What does one of those like fight or flight, like I'm sure there's plenty of different ways to do it. And I know you said like not all the time, but every now and then just to kind of change the pulse of the room or to kind of maybe kick some intensity in. What is like a practice or like something you could do for that?
Well, I can tell you, I remember one thing I did. I actually stole this from Coach Scott. It was during my Piedmont days. Man, there was one day that I just knew that, and it wasn't even that day, it was leading up. I'm like, okay, we're having some good days. And we were having like 3 or 4 consecutive good days. And things are only going to go so well for so long before something else happens. And my boys' swagger was starting to change a little bit. They were feeling themselves. You see,
complacent.
A little complacency. And what was crazy is that we were nowhere near the season yet. So I'm like, oh, we got to nip this in the bud right now.
Yesterday.
Right. And so I started noticing little things that we were anal about as a staff and making sure that they paid attention to it. They started to slip a little bit. So like if the activity period or the athletic period starts at 2:00, right? The bell to dismiss them my way, it'll go off at 1:55, right? And so I'll say, I'm going to be generous. Instead of giving you 5 minutes to get dressed, I would always say, I'm going to give you 10 minutes. So 2:05, that buzzer's going off, we're starting practice, right? So I'll have the clock running with 10 minutes on there and it's running. So when things, before they got complacent like that, I would notice that the majority of the guys will be on the floor dressed with a basketball in their hand, shooting around and doing whatever with about 3 minutes left to spare. But on this particular day, I'm sitting up there looking at the clock. It gets to where it's 5 minutes left. There's nobody in the gym but me. I'm like, okay. It gets to 4 minutes. Still nobody else in the gym but me. Then the 3 minute mark comes and goes. And so the first person I could see through the doors in the hallway, they were just out there, BSing, congregating, killing time. The first player didn't walk into the gym to take the floor till about 1 minute and 30 seconds left on that clock.
Cutting it close.
And I don't allot time for stretching, not before practice. I'm like, listen, you know your body. You know what you need. You know what it takes to get yourself prepared and ready to go.
You get them 10 minutes.
Yeah.
They have time to spare for the most part anyway.
Listen, I know that may be, people may be not fond of that idea, but that's my way of giving them, like, you got to take some ownership in this. All right. So I'm like, okay, these guys are feeling themselves. And it wasn't a real infraction. It was just small. But I'm like, this is going to fester if I don't get them.
That could grow into other things. It always starts out with something small.
Yeah, it does, man. It does. And so I just sat back and waited. And then once the last person came in there pretty much at the buzzer, I just went off, dude. I just snapped. You know what I mean? Now I had to put on a little bit because I wasn't that mad. Yeah. But you got to make them think you're crazier than them sometimes. So I snapped, went off, cussed them out. Put them out of the gym. Just told them to get dressed, and they got 5 minutes to get out of the uniforms. Or we coming back out here, we're gonna run like hell, something like that, and just ran them out of the building. And so the next morning, because we were practicing twice a day, when I saw them the next morning, everything was on point. You know what I mean? And we got back in the saddle, and we just had to like recalibrate, so to speak, hit that reset button a little bit. And yeah, it was fun to do. But I was really just waiting to see if it was going to be some results, because I didn't want to show my ass for nothing, and I didn't.
And that's a scenario where, in a setting where you kind of did that to kind of light a fire underneath your whole team, what's something that you do to light a fire under, like, maybe one of your leading scorers who, like, or one of your leaders, period, who's going through a slump, and he's letting his own head, kind of stop him, and then the rest of the team starting to kind of get sucked into that. Sometimes you kind of have to adjust that to one person. How would you kind of address that?
Well, if I have a player who seems like he's in his own head, a lot of times they're down, so I don't think I would kick them. You see what I'm saying? Because I've been that player before, where I'm just thinking too much, or I'm worried about whatever in the hell. I mean, see, me personally, I was worried about being the teammate that people said was shooting the ball too much. So I would get reluctant
when you catch.
Exactly. And
critiquing
so now,
the heck out of your shot. Like,
there you
what's
go.
going on?
Now I'm being passive, and that's hurting the team.
Yeah, not a threat.
And so it got to my coach got past the point of fussing at me. He just started sitting me down, And so that's what I do nowadays, as opposed to just ripping him, especially if he looks like he's rattled anyway and his confidence may be shaken.
They're still kids.
They're still kids. Also, I'll sub them out of the game. Give him a pat on the back and let him know, you're all right, and let him rest on it and trust my depth to that point. And then we'll go back with this kid a little later on and see if he can sort of shake the cobwebs off and get out of the slump. And that gives my assistant coaches a little chance to pour into him, because that's another thing I've learned. I don't have to be the guy that you as a player get it from. I just want you to get it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You may relate to one of my assistants better than you do with me, because the boss always has the presence alone makes everybody else kind of tighten up just a little bit. You're not gonna be as loose as you are.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's
that's
like
the same in any work setting.
Any work setting. I use this expression all the time. It's like, even in my classroom, like my students are gonna react differently to the principal walking in rather than one of my fellow teachers coming through. It's just the way it is.
Or they were the subs there and a day you're there.
Now the sub is totally different. Kids will try it all on the sub, man.
Yeah.
But you get what I'm saying.
We did that when we were in high school.
For sure. For sure.
You gotta test it a little bit.
Yeah, man. You gotta do it. You gotta touch that stove every now and again.
So let's take it all the way back to Tulsa, like the early years. And one metaphor I like to use, just like when talking about, I guess, like basketball specifically, is for a lot of like coaches and aspiring coaches,
right,
basketball has been a constant. Like, it's been a part of your life, no matter where you've moved to, no matter what job you've pursued, whether you're playing it in the backyard growing up, or recess, you're playing 2K, hopefully not NBA Live.
Yeah.
You're just playing it, you're watching it on TV, all that stuff. Basketball, if you grow up with the game and you continue to coach and play, if you think about it, like, basketball has been a constant throughout most of your life.
That's right.
What have been like some of your other like constants that you've had that have just like always kind of been there, that you might not even realize have always been there?
Being able to talk for some reason.
Just conversational.
Yeah, in
socializing.
In a setting like this, though. And I think I get it honest from my parents, because my mother, she was a communications major or broadcast journalism, one of those two. And then my dad, he's an attorney. So, they've been running their yap for years. And so I guess I get that from them. But I've always sort of had this idea, like, when you envision yourself shooting that last shot, you count down 3, 2, 1. I had that too. But I also, in my mind, the voices of my childhood that would call those 90s Bulls games that I'm in love with, you know what I'm saying? Like the Bob Costases of the world, the Marv Alberts of the world. And then you hear Ahmad Rashad. Like, these are voices that if I hear them right now, it's going to take me right back to that era. Stuart Scott, the late great. And so I would sort of envision myself sometimes being in their shoes too. Putting on a nice clean suit, getting
narrating.
That fresh cut, narrating, doing the play-by-play, or just being able to sit across from one of my favorites and ask them some questions that I always wanted to have answered. So that was something that was always there, but it was like untapped. It's probably because it wasn't cool back then.
Yeah.
When you're a kid, you got certain stuff that's considered cool, and anything that's outside of that bubble is weird, and you don't want to be the weirdo, do you?
Isn't that a shame, though, how that still is like the main thing that stops people from doing anything is what are they going to think about it? And I think even if we look into ourselves, like, what stops us from doing X or Y, the main thing is, like, we're not stopping ourselves because we want to. We're stopping because what does so-and-so think about it? What does so-and-so think about it?
Sure. Either that or we're afraid of failing. And I've been guilty of that before. But here's why I let people off not all the way off the hook, but a little bit off the hook when it comes to what will people think, is that I think your reputation matters to you, and it should. So you want to be conscious of what you do and how you do it, what you say and how you say it, because I know me, I would love for everybody that I've ever come into contact with, even if it was just a, hey, how you doing in passing, I would love for them to know everything about me so they can know that this dude really is a good guy.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? But the reality is we don't get a chance to do that with everybody.
No.
So that's why, like, if I catch you in a pissy mood or something, and it's my first exchange with you, and that pissy mood, I get that vibe immediately.
First impressions, man.
Yeah. Now, whenever I talk to Smoot about you, yeah, hey, how's that Luke guy? I'm like, man, he's an ass. I don't know that. I could be wrong. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? So I can understand folks being mindful of, man, how will this make me look? How will this, that, and the other? But I think the deciding factor has to be, how important is it to you? And can you put your big boy pants on or your big girl pants on and live with the fact that not everybody's going to be in love with everything that you do, and just get your skin thick enough to take that criticism. And really, most people aren't bold enough to say what they really think about you anyway, unless it's positive. Not to your face. They'll chirp behind the scenes. You may hear it third party if it's bad, but usually if they're wanting to praise you, they'll say it to your face. Even if they're lying. Yeah. There's a weird form of respect in that too.
Yeah. So those two constants, basketball, obviously you're exercising that by just this coaching journey you've been on, and now you're actually getting to tap into that communication, that talkative side of you more. How has this been? Not only like you've been able to, bring people in that, you might have had a good relationship with before, might have had I don't know you that well. Like you've been able to probably glean so much information and insight from different people. Because I know for me, as someone who interviewed so many coaches as a journalist, I just learned so much just listening to them talk. You're getting to do that in such a comfortable setting for elongated periods of time.
Right.
How much has that benefited you, not only from a standpoint of exercising this kind of passion and strength of yours, but also from a standpoint of you're picking the brains of people who are trying to do what you're doing,
right,
and vice versa.
Now, are you asking me how I learned that through me podcasting or through me coaching?
Podcasting.
Man, listen, it's literally a conversation, just a regular personal conversation, just with the cameras on and the mics on. That's how I look at it, because whenever I'm in your seat, I always make it a point to never ask you something that I wouldn't ask you with the cameras off. So that makes it more conversational. But the reason, I'll tell you the reason why I started doing that in the first place is because I watch a bunch of radio shows and podcasts pretty much on a daily. I'm a hip hop music fan. I'm a wrestling fan, a WWE kid from back in the day. And so I'm always watching stuff that pertains to that stuff every day. And I just got to thinking one day, like, man, not to disrespect anybody else who may be out there on the grind and maybe I'm missing something, but I didn't see that space tapped into in my part of the world, in the state of Oklahoma, in this region. I'm like, okay, well, what if we created that? And when I say we, I'm talking about me and my videographer, my guy, Landon Smoot over there. And I'm like, man, let's see if we can do something like that for this area. So I had to pick an area that I'm knowledgeable of. I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but it's something that I know a little something about, and that's basketball and sports in general. So I said, okay, cool. Now, how can I make it educational? And I really was personalizing it. I was like, okay, I want to be able to get something out of this too. And so when I'm sitting across from whoever I'm sitting across from, they're pouring into me. So just as much as whoever's watching and listening may be getting something from it, I'm getting something from it directly. I'm moving out of the way. I'm just throwing the alley-oop,
I'm asking my questions for a reason, man.
That's it.
Same thing.
That's it. But it just so happens that, and I'm not just lying to you, I've gotten some good feedback from a lot of people saying, hey man, I enjoy this. And I'm like, bet. And it's not anything that I'm doing. I just set the platform.
Yeah, you allow them to speak up.
Right, that's it.
That's the name of the podcast.
Yeah, man, and I learned so much listening to folks talk. And I'm gonna tell you, Katie Bass said something to me when I had her on the podcast. She's the head girls coach at Mustang, and she was talking about scouting reports. It's something so simple. And she said, we go through our scouting reports. We watch film. We break down the film on our opponents, right? And what she says she does is that she makes her girls save those scouting reports, right? And if I'm misquoting, I'm pretty sure she'll text me and correct me. But she makes them save their scouting reports even after the game is played. They'll tuck them away somewhere in the locker or something like that. And then whenever they're playing that squad the second time of the season, they revert back to the scouting report from the first time they played them, and then they add whatever needs to be added based on what they may have learned during that first matchup, or what they may have learned once they've seen that team play again since their first matchup. And I'm like, well, that makes perfect sense, because I think the first time around, early in my stint, we only scouted one time. And that may have been my ego right there. And I'm like, listen, we only gonna scout them the first time around. After we play them once, we know what's happening. Let's just go out there, swinging in the dark. And a couple times it worked, and teams didn't really, a particular team didn't really adjust, and we took care of business. Other times, man, listen, the team that we played the second time around was an entirely different group than what we saw the first semester, and we got some work put on us. And so when she said that, I'm like, but just something that simple, I learned from just sitting and talking, man.
Yeah, because just as you did when you saw the complacency start to trickle in, like good coaches make adjustments.
Yeah.
If something's not working, if you're being exploited one way, like if that happens to you again,
right?
Like then you really need to make something happen.
Yeah, just don't be hard-headed. Because when you don't know whatever you don't know, but whenever you know better, you gotta do better.
Speaking of being hard-headed, I know one of the things that non-coaches might not think about is how coaches, how much of an interaction they have to have with parents. Not saying that it's a always ongoing thing,
right?
But you definitely that's not an aspect that you can neglect. Like there has to be some sort of line of communication.
Yeah.
How do you handle stuff like that? Positive, negative? How do you do you do anything to establish contact with them at the beginning, or what's your way of approaching it?
My way of approaching it is like this, right? My first parent meeting that I have, and this has been at both Tecumseh and Piedmont, my last 2 stints as a head coach, it's like I'd have a parent meeting just like everybody else does. And a part of my breakdown, whether I lead with it or I end with it, I always figure out a way to say this. I say, guys, we got a room full of people in here. There's no way we're all going to agree on anything. You know what I'm saying? And I always give them an example because I'm an analogy guy. I like that. I just like to paint some pictures if I can. So I say, if I ask everybody in here, if I say, hey, listen here, we're going to go grab a meal after this meeting's over. It's my treat. I'm covering everybody. All y'all got to do is come up with one thing that you want to eat, that everybody wants to eat. One place, one meal, whatever. Let's see if we can get on the same page on that. It wouldn't happen. And that's something small. And so my point behind saying that to him is there's no way we're all going to agree on everything. Okay? So what I would say, listen, just know that my staff and myself, we're not going to knowingly do your child wrong. Everything that we do is going to be for the betterment of the program. You may not like it. You may not agree with it. But allow us to do our job, just like we allow you guys to do your job. All right. It's one of those things. Hey, we don't tell you how to be parents. Please don't try to tell us how to be coaches. And I always make sure that I let them know that our practices are open. Now, very few of them come. It just happens that way. A lot of parents, I won't say most, but many of them will just wait to see the finished product, which is the game. And if they don't like what they see from you as a coach, whether it's, oh, you didn't start my kid or you didn't play him enough, then they're looking at that and they've got a problem with that. But if you know a little something about playing and coaching, there's a whole lot that leads up to the game. All right. And the practice habits tell a whole lot. So I let them know, hey, you're invited to come to practice at any point. And I always say I would suggest, since I can't demand, but I suggest you don't let your kid know when you're going to show up on him. That's when you'll get a real true observation of what this kid is all about when you're not around. And last thing, I'll let them know, hey, you can always come and talk to me, just not on a game day. Before or after, win or loss, leave me alone. All right, because emotions can go crazy, and I'll let them know, just like y'all can go there, I can go there too, and we don't need two fools. You see?
Yeah. No.
And you can tell them that. It's really like a disclaimer because they hear you in that moment, but then the emotions take over whenever they're in the moment, and they just forget all that, and then they coming at you.
Yeah, when you see red, all logic goes out the door.
Yeah, and I feel them though about as much as I can because I'm not a parent, but I've been somebody's kid before, and I've seen my parents be irrational. Not necessarily towards a coach, but just in general, be irrational about me or my brother because we're their babies, So on some level, I get it. And so I grant them some grace on that. But I got to establish some parameters because it is indeed my program.
Has the open practice policy been something you've always adopted, or is that something that you kind of shifted your perspective on the longer you've been coaching?
That's always been there. But it's always been something that's very rarely obliged by the parents, you know. They don't always take you up. And sometimes they just can't. They've got lives. They got to go earn money, you know, go feed the fam and all that. They don't necessarily have time to sit in the gym and watch practice. But at least I can say I put it out there for them.
Yeah. Did your parents ever show up to your practices?
Yeah. My dad was there all the time because he was the bookkeeper for my high school teams pretty much all 4 of my years. So whether I wanted him there or not, he was there. And we went through our battles sometimes of him, you know, just wanting to coach me in his own special way. And you know, when you come of age, you get to the point where you really don't want to hear too much from your parents anymore. Even though what they're saying to you is good, it's useful, but it's like it's the same voice you've been hearing.
It's a pride thing. Like, no, I'm an adult. No, I'm doing this, or I'm getting there.
Yeah, getting there. And yeah, you know, teenagers are crazy anyway, man. I say crazy with love because they want to be independent, yet they're so totally dependent. You see what I mean? They're not paying for anything. They're not living on their own. Everything that they have is because their parents provided it for them. But they're coming of age thinking that I should be treated as if I do all these things, but you don't.
Grown.
But you don't.
Yeah.
And so, but my dad was great though. He realized whenever I had like stopped hearing him. And so in an effort to preserve our personal relationship, he just backed off. And he let my coaches coach me, and he was just dad. And what that did was, after a while, I started to notice that we weren't interacting as much about basketball. And not only did our personal relationship improve, because I'm a big daddy's boy to this day, I got to the point to where I would start, you know, longing for his opinion on what I was doing and how I was doing it. So I came and sought him, and that made him feel more a part of the process again and felt needed in that regard. And it just worked, man.
Since we're talking about your playing days, who's like a player, like NBA player, that you would compare your game to, just game style?
Man, this may be high praise, but I'm gonna say it anyway.
No, just
Tim Duncan.
Okay.
Yeah, because
posts, bank shots,
right?
Fundamentals.
Man. That's it, man. Folks that play with me, not all of them, but a lot of them that played with me or played against me would always they would just holler that out when we're playing pickup or something like that, because I would do those fundamental things you just mentioned, man.
The unsexy things.
The unsexy. Thank you for saying that, man. The stuff that doesn't necessarily make the stat sheet. You know, I was going to dive on the floor for loose balls.
But the necessary things.
I was going to take charges. I was going to shoot that bank shot every single time.
Defense.
Going to talk on defense. But that was something that we all had to do in high school. So I was no different. And since I was a tall kid, just like I'm a tall man, but I never was above the rim at all. Never was a dynamic athlete. Wasn't super fast. Wasn't super quick. You know, you might be able to get a piece of paper under my feet when I jump. You know what I mean? So
we can test it out.
There you go, man. But I had to compensate for those deficiencies, if you want to call them that, in different ways. So I had to learn how to think the game and do things correctly from a fundamental standpoint, from a foundation standpoint. And it made it to where I'm still able to play to this day. Like if I was a high leaper and I was a crash dummy taking a bunch of punishment, my game was predicated on athleticism, I would have broke down probably about 3 or 4 years ago. But I still got some life left. And so I'm glad that it went that way for me. But people would, Tim Duncan, the big fundamental. And back when I didn't even appreciate his game.
But it's like, oh, I want to be compared to someone else.
But now, like, if you don't call me that, I'm gonna call me that.
Yeah.
You know? So it's like that.
Was that something you talked about, not being a dynamic athlete above the rim?
Right.
When you're younger and you're kind of growing up, you might be like more irrational thinking about like what you can do. And like, was there a certain point you remember where you're like, okay, I'm going to have to really cater my game to my strengths because I probably never will be a high flyer? Was that, like, did you like at any point want to be that, or did you kind of always know what you were? Man,
I went through that phase of wanting to be that. I can remember I spent the whole summer, I think, the summer going into high school. So that would have been 2003. Man, that whole summer in the weight room, it was nothing but legs for me. Squats, leg presses, leg extensions, leg curls, calf raises, all of that, man. All of that. I can probably count on one hand how many times I went in that weight room and did anything, working on any body part from the waist up. It was just all about trying to get some bounce, trying to be able to get up and dunk the basketball, man. And, eventually I fell off, I guess you could say, because I realized that, damn, I'm working this hard and I'm getting this much. I must be getting close to my ceiling. Now, maybe that wasn't the right way to think about it, but I just knew that I didn't have to be that in order to be a good basketball player.
Yeah. If you had put that much time and effort and intensity to other areas, you'd probably see the fruits of that labor more than you would, trying to increase your vertical leap.
That's what I had to get back to.
So at what point in your playing career did you realize that you wanted to coach? Because after you graduated, you won y'all won in 06, graduated 07.
Right.
Then you played basketball for 4 years after that, collegiately, excuse me. At what point along that timeline did you decide, okay, after I'm done, like I want to stay in the game, I want to coach? At what point did you kind of like hold on to that and identify that?
My freshman year in college. I'm gonna tell you why. Number one, I went to Murray State College down in Tishomingo, Oklahoma. Right, super small town. I'm a metropolitan area kid. I'm a city kid. Right, so that was a culture shock right out of the gate. And then I'm one of the lesser talented players in the program at that time. And I got real homesick real quick, and I just got to thinking like, man, I don't belong here, or beyond that, I don't want to be here. But I got to thinking, damn, I've been saying I want to coach. What's it gonna look like if I quit now and I start coaching? And then one of my players, it's inevitable, they're gonna ask, hey coach, did you play basketball? And then I say yes, and then they say, did you play basketball in college? How do I answer that question? And I was thinking about my credibility at that point. Now, obviously, we've seen coaches who didn't have a college career, or maybe even didn't play in high school, just love the game so much. They study it, they learn it, they get under some good tutelage, and they turn out to be a great coach. But my path wasn't that, So I said, hey, man, I got to finish this since I started it. But I went home for the holiday break, which would have been December 2007. And my high school coach, Terry Scott, he was still at Central in his last season, And so I would come back, talk to the guys. These are the same guys I was just going to school with a year ago, or really like 9 months before that. And he let me come into practice and help him out, give some instruction, give some advice. I'm doing some tutoring, so to speak. He let me come and sit on the bench during one of their tournaments that they had over the holidays. He put me in the coach's gear, so I'm feeling official. But I took it seriously. It wasn't just fun and games. And then I noticed that whenever I was speaking, I had the attention of these guys that were sitting in this room. And that's tough to do as a 19-year-old. And these are guys a year younger than me, 2 years, maybe 3 years. So they're 16, 17, 18 years old. And if you know anything about teenagers, they don't really just take dictatorship from grown-ups like they should.
But you commanded the room for whatever reason.
For whatever reason. And the reason was because I knew them. But that was enough for me to get a taste of what it's like to be in that spot. And I'm like, man, I could do this. I felt like I knew what I was talking about. I felt like I was being heard and what I was saying was resonating. And I'm like, man, that was the battery in my back that I needed to keep on playing, because I was really close to just calling it a career, and just coming back home and starting my coaching career. But I'm glad I didn't. But that right there, December 2007, that's when I realized, yeah, this is for me, man.
And then after your career was over, that's all wrapped up. Real quick, before I go on to that, what's it like going onto the court for like your last game? Like it's the last time you're lacing them up. There's no overseas.
Right.
There's no pros. You're sitting there in the locker room pregame, knowing like, hey, like I might be shooting around and hear these shoes squeak on the hardwood at some point, but there's gonna be no ref throwing that ball up. There's gonna be no coach yelling at me, no subs being made.
None of that.
Like what was that like just going into that this hour, 2 hours of your playing career? What's that like?
Man, that whole day was tough for me. It was, man, because like have you ever been in a situation like maybe you lost a loved one or something like that, and that you're feeling it, but you're trying to mask it the best you can. But if somebody says the right thing,
trigger, button push,
or if they hug you too tight, you're just gonna start bawling. So like I was on edge like that all day, where I felt like, man, at any minute I could just start crying, man. And this is gonna sound weird to you, but dude, I played on 4 bad teams in college, record wise, and so it made it to where I didn't play in the postseason not 1 year when I was in college. So when the last game of every season came, we knew it was gonna be the last one. But in a way, I was glad to know I was glad to know that it was going to be the last act, as opposed to, maybe making a run to the national tournament. And every game could be your last, but you don't think it's going to be. Yeah, so if it ends, it ends abruptly.
Yeah.
You had no preparation for it. But that whole week leading up to the last one, I knew it was going to be it. So, man, it was heavy. It was heavy. I was ready to hit the floor, but then again, I was like, nah, man, I wish we had one more hour of shoot around, one more hour to just congregate with the fellas.
Yeah.
And the best news about that whole night is that we won.
You
see what I'm saying? And so I could say that the last act was a win. I think, not to get super corny, but I think I had a little moment, when I got in my car at the end of that game and I was about to drive back over there to the dorms and go pour something up and go kick it, you know what I mean? But I had to drop a few, had to drop a few tears because it was over, but it had done all that I wanted it to do for me. It got me to school, it got me through school. Now, the only thing I wish was different, I wish those scholarships were full as opposed to just half. Otherwise, I wouldn't still be in debt. But that's something else. But it was great, though. I loved it, man. And I'm glad, even though 4 bad teams, man, I met a lot of dudes that I still got relationships with to this day. Crazy as hell. Some of they've gone on to be great coaches or fathers, husbands, the whole nine, man. And I'm not sure if I would have gotten that experience had I not finished like I did.
You make that transition from playing, and then you become an assistant. Where was that at again? Your first?
Yeah, that was in Muskogee.
And then you were there for how many years? A handful of years, 5 years.
5 seasons, yes, sir.
So, real quick before I dive into that, what are the differences coaching girls and boys, and what did you maybe learn from coaching girls that you could apply to coaching boys? Because obviously, while they're not like the exact same, it's still the same sport.
Right.
It's, you might approach things a little bit differently, but for the most part, it probably overlaps a ton. What would you say, just comparing and contrasting the two?
One thing I had to figure out real quick is that you do not have to babysit them, or I ain't gonna say babysit. You don't have to be tender with them necessarily. I learned that quick. I remember when I first got on the scene, I was like, all right, I'm walking on eggshells here. Do I? I'm seeing some tomfoolery take place over there. Do I raise my voice and scream at them? Or is that just gonna make them cry? I was really, but then when I saw the head coach, who's my boss at the time, Coach Rowland, I saw him light into one of those girls, man, and he got onto them, and it was unisex. And I'm like, oh, so okay, this is the way it is, and they responded well. They didn't go cower in the corner and cry. Yeah. It didn't crush them. They got it. They got an attitude like all kids do when you press them a little bit.
Of course.
And that's when I realized that you coach them like athletes. In the words of one of my former coworkers, Jack Revis, he used to say, we don't coach you like girls, coach you like athletes, and that's a fact. So that was the thing. But from an instructional standpoint, I've learned that girls trust sooner than the boys do.
Each other, everything.
Coaching, leadership, and maybe I've been told by some people, I'm not sure if this is true, but they say, it could have something to do with me being like a male. I've been told by even some ladies before, like, when you're coaching girls as a man, there's this thing where they don't want to let you down kind of deal. And I wish I had more experience to speak from, but I've only been a man, so maybe that's true. I've never been on the other side of it.
It's 2020.
There you go. Oh yeah, facts. But yeah, man, in my experiences, it didn't take very long for them to buy into what we were selling. Now, when I'm coaching boys, they improv like right out of the gate, and a lot of times don't even try it the base way that they've been taught in the way that you're trying to illustrate it to them. They just go start freestyling, so to speak. Just keep touching the stove. That's the analogy that I use a lot. And it just takes longer, but eventually they get to that point to where they bump their head enough times, or you've had to make an example out of so many of them so many times that they finally just say, all right, we're with you, coach. What we're gonna do here? And then when you got them, you got them. It just takes a while to get them, But in the girls, last thing I'll say, or last 2 things, girls are easier to love from my standpoint. The relationship aspect of it, it was easy. It was easier to have those one-on-ones, or have those moments that are a bit more intimate. Because fellas, that just ain't how we roll. We got that machismo about us. We got that ego, and it stops us from being as vulnerable as we need to be sometimes in order to really get to the root of whatever issue we're dealing with. So But when you can have that level of transparency and that level of vulnerability with another one of your players as a guy, and your player is a guy, but there's no insecurity on the part of any of them, you're working with something. But girls, you get to that point easier, and at least in my experiences, you know what I mean? And then obviously you got the most obvious, the fellas, they have at least a little bit more athleticism that they can fall back on from a physical standpoint to compensate for a lack of skill that they may have in one area. Whereas girls, unless you have an exceptional athletic talent that you're dealing with, a lot of times they have to really be sound fundamentally. All right, which means you as a teacher or as a coach, you got to really be sound in your methods of teaching. And it made me better as a result of that.
That first stint, 5 years, do you think it's fair to say that's like probably like a lot longer, like duration wise, than many other coaches' first coaching stint, whether it's 2 years somewhere, a year somewhere, 3 years? How much do you think you benefited just from the continuity, you know, half a decade, really establishing your feet and the groundwork for your career going forward as a coach? Like, you got to stay in the same program for, you know, season after season after season. Whereas had you been jumping around, that definitely has its benefits too. But you probably saw some things your way that other coaches might not have seen because they're moving so much, and you know. What was that like?
Well, number one, it made it hard for me to leave when it was time to leave.
Oh yeah.
You know, because it's always easy to get up and go whenever you're in a situation that you cannot stand and that you're ready to get out of. But when it was time for me to go, that situation was anything but that. I was comfortable there. My whole adult life at that point was there. But a lot of what groomed me is that, man, I got to be around a lot of those girls from when they were 7th or 8th grade all the way through, you know?
Yeah, I got to see them grow up.
Got to see them grow up. And you got pictures to prove it. Like, wow, I remember when you were just a little chunk. And now you grew into yourself, you know? And then their families got to know me. I got to know them. They trusted me. You know, I got all the way in with that community. And one thing about Muskogee that I learned is that they can be very territorial. You know, if you're an outsider or a newcomer coming down there, they, you know, these are my experiences only. They there's this transitional phase of them, you know, feeling you out, trying to see what you're all about, and make up in their mind whether or not they like you based on what vibe that you give off. Now, if they don't dig you, you're gonna feel it. You'll know. But when you're in, and I got in, you know. And the coaching staff, man, they all were from Muskogee, except for maybe one. I think Jack Revis is from Tahlequah, but he had been in Muskogee for so long, you may as well call him one of the Muskogeans, right? And so they had all been there for multiple years before I got there, and been residents in the community for long before we met. And so they loved that community, because I think that's the only time that I've seen a staff stay intact for 5 years straight. No rearranging. That core five: Aaron Daniels, that's me, Doyle Rowland, Rudell Wilson, Shanika Breedlove, Jack Revis. We all were there for 5 years together, and nobody even thought about leaving. The only one thought about leaving was me, because I was young. You know what I mean? And hungry. I was trying to get trying to get my career started as a head coach. So after my first 2 years, I started thinking I was ready. And I'm glad I didn't get an opportunity, because I wasn't there yet. You see what I mean? And so it taught me patience. It taught me the importance of community, because Muskogee is a big, small town. It's not city. It's not country. It's not rural. It's like a hybrid of all of that. But man, just having things like the whole town in one facility to watch you guys play basketball, man, and people knowing who you are that you've never met before whenever you go out into a grocery store or something like that. It sort of groomed me for a place like Piedmont when I went, which is a small town itself, Tecumseh, small town itself. And I sort of knew how to navigate for the most part.
Was there a particular like moment you could remember where you had finally felt like you had crossed that threshold from working your way in to being in? Like, how long did that period kind of take? And is there an instance that you remember where you like kind of clicked, like I'm here now, like I'm part of this family now?
During the Muskogee days?
Yes.
Yeah, I do, man. This is crazy, because I was talking to somebody about this not too long ago. Coleman Hughes, I mentioned him earlier. He's very much one of those guys that, you know, when he first meets you, he's not the warmest, you know, and I don't blame him. You know, he's been through some things, and so, you know, as you go through stuff, you
keep your guard up.
Yeah, you keep your guard up. He for sure did that. So let's if school started in August, I'd say maybe by November. You know,
I was thinking about me and Milla. I'm like, 4 or 5 months.
Man, this is something like that. And what's crazy, like Coach Hughes, we would see each other in passing because we worked in the same building, and he knew who I was because word travels and all that. And so we would speak. How you doing, Coach? What's up? Here's what's up. Keep moving. You know,
you as a conversationalist, you take that as like, oh,
yeah.
I kind of like shoots you down a little bit.
Yeah, but I didn't take it personally because in my mind, I'm like, oh, we're gonna get there. You're gonna talk to me.
Yeah.
You're gonna
Persistence.
Talk to me. That's right. And so one day, I don't know, maybe it was the consistency you're talking about or the persistence of me, you know, constantly doing that to him
keep knocking
every
on
time.
That door till it
keep
opens.
knocking on the door. And here was the breakthrough moment. I'm sitting in the counseling room one day, and he comes in. He sees me sitting in there. He just sticks his head in there and he says something as if we're picking up from a conversation that we left off earlier that day or something. He said, "You see that game last night?" And I said, "Yeah, man, that was crazy, wasn't it?" He's like, "Yeah, it was. That was a hell of a game." Stuck his head out and took off walking. I was like, "Oh, okay. I guess I'm in now."
Yeah.
And so from that moment on, every time we saw each other, there was an exchange. It wasn't just, you know, just high and by. We would talk and actually have conversations and got to be pretty close. You know, where he and his wife Heidi, you know, good people. They would invite me over to the house, and I'm kicking it with the little ones. You know what I mean? They cooking. You know, I'm eating. It's all that. So it just grew from there, man. That was one of those moments to where I'm like, okay, maybe there's some light at the end of this tunnel after all.
You said after 2 years, in that moment, you thought you were ready, but in retrospect, you're glad you not only doubled that, but tacked on an additional year.
That's right.
Why are you glad? Like, what do you know now, I guess, that you didn't know as you closed the chapter on year 2? Like, okay, maybe I'm ready for this next step. Like, what do you like know now about those 3 following years, why they were so important to you?
Right. Well, after the second year, during that stint, we had 5 teams that won 20 plus games, right? And 4 out of those 5 years we made it to the state tournament. The 1 year we didn't was that second year, my second year. And so had I left then, I miss out on the next year's run to the state semifinals, you know, with the babies when they were like sophomores, didn't know much of anything. We get to the state semis. Then the following year after that, we get to the state finals and lose in overtime, right? And then the year after that, we go back to the state semifinals, losing double overtime. So I'm missing all these experiences to coach at that level. And I would have missed the development of some really great talents, man. You know, I got to be around some girls that could really go. And I'm going to throw some names at you that won't mean anything to you, but they mean everything to me. Like Trina Mims, who's playing ball at North Texas right now. Jada Ford, who just finished her career at Arkansas State University. Aaliyah Wilson, who was a 2-time Gatorade Player of the Year in the state of Oklahoma. She's still playing at where's she at now? She is at Texas A&M right now. You know, she started off at University of Arkansas. You know, and just names like that. Kelsey McClure, who went on to play at Central Arkansas, and then she ended up rerouting and finished. I can't remember where she finished, but she'll probably get on to me about that. Arkansas Tech, I think that's where she finished. You know, Alexis Wilson, she went on and played at ORU. So it's like I miss a lot of these experiences if I jump ship too quick. And then as an adult, I was only 23 or 24 years old, and I'm still figuring life out now at 31. So if I leave the nest and come all the way across the state away from my parents, who was the safety net at that time, and still are to this day to some degree, man, I'll be like a fish out of water, you know. And I didn't have my credentials as a teacher yet, so I wasn't qualified on paper to be in that role yet. So patience, man, back to that word. And I'm glad it happened the way it happened.
When you transition from your first assistant job, and then you go to fulfill that opportunity to be the head coach for the first time. How did you approach that? Obviously, approaching that now, you know, round 3, you know so much more just through your own trials and tribulations and
That's right.
what you've gone through and just experience, like not only who you are as a coach, but who you are as a man and what you know just about life.
That's true.
How did you approach that first head coaching opportunity, and where do you feel like you might have been a bit like naive in that, or like just no fault of your own, just like stuff, reality that you hadn't seen or experienced or like lived before.
Right.
Like you're never really ready until you experience it with some things.
That's a fact. The way I approached my first gig as a head coach, man, I was just so hungry, dog. I was so hungry. I was excited to prove that I could do this. Not to anybody else, because I think I had way more supporters than I had doubters, I believe. But it was just something I wanted to prove to myself that, okay, here we go. I've been pounding the pavement for 5 years for this particular opportunity. Let me go make good on it. And man, I was just so full of that vigor and that energy, and anything that wasn't the process of development in basketball didn't really get much of my attention. So a lot of other relationships personally, I sort of neglected to some degree. You know, I was just so singularly focused on getting this program built. And I wanted my players to share my same passion, my same hunger. And so my mindset was, as much time of theirs that I can consume with basketball, I'm going to do it. And that is not good for longevity, I don't think. There is a such thing as burnout. There is a such thing as, you know, hitting your peak too soon and then you start to taper. And I think those things you flirt with when you don't know when to take a break, you know, or when to let them go be kids. All right. And actually allow them to miss the game a little bit to where they're longing to get back in the gym. But what happens, I think, a lot of times that can get in the way, can cloud your judgment on that, is when you have a player or a few players who are maniacal about the process like you are. And so now y'all working together. As much as you want it, they want to be in there. So it's kind of hard to tell them, nah. It's like, so if you were second guessing yourself, and then, you know, Smoot comes in there, it's like, Coach, man, what's happening, man? Let's work. No, forget all that, bro. Let's work. And now you're going from nah to yeah, let's work. Forget this day off. But, you know, you got to think about where you want to be some weeks or some months down the line. Longevity. And but that's like a sixth sense or a third eye that not very many 27-year-olds as a first-year head coach are going to be able to identify. That comes with time, and I hadn't had that much time in yet.
What about round two? What did you learn from your approach, everything that went down round one? Yeah. Bring it into round two. How is the approach then?
Right. My approach then was, well, see, my Piedmont stint ended in a messy fashion. You see what I'm saying? I got myself in a little bit of trouble, and I got fired. You know, and the details of that ordeal well documented, right? So I was so gung ho on getting back in the driver's seat. I wanted to be a head coach again, real quick. I didn't want to have to go the route of being an assistant. You see what I'm saying? And not to denigrate that position, but I just felt like, I'm not done in this role. And so I think I may have been shopping myself too much, like applying to too many jobs, just trying to get one, without necessarily doing my due diligence on figuring out some of the history of this program that I may be trying to go to.
Yeah, just to kind of, and this might be the wrong way to say it, but just kind of fill that void. You're a head coach, now it's taken away from you. Right. You want that back because that's what you've been working towards. Exactly. You don't want to feel like you're taking steps back as you're supposed to be moving forward. That's what you're like in your mind, right? So that's totally understandable, but you felt like you were maybe just you were just trying to use it as a means to an end, almost just like, I'm just going to apply here, and just whatever I can to get that back.
That's a fact.
If it means spreading myself thin in the process a little bit and learning about these.
I definitely did that, man, because I was in a less than ideal situation logistically when it came to Tecumseh, because I was still living in Northwest Oklahoma City, where we are right now. And so my commute every day was an hour or two and an hour back.
Oh, that's draining.
It's draining.
You probably listen to a lot of good podcasts, though.
Absolutely.
If you wouldn't have done that, then maybe you wouldn't be doing this.
Listen, man, I had some of the greatest conversations with myself. You know what I mean? Going on those roads.
Real introspective, man.
Very introspective, man. But it was just
those long drives will get you.
That's right. But I wanted to be back in the saddle. But my approach, to answer your initial question, at Tecumseh, I was more diplomatic with my players. I think I'm trying to think of how many moments I had where I just had to really turn the volume up and get up in one of my players. I'm pretty sure it happened, but I can't go back to it in my mind. So I wanted to make sure that I was instructional and very intentional with my conversation and with the words that I chose, because, I know I won't ever be done making mistakes, but I was like, okay, if I do get the can again, it can't be for the same reasons that I got the can the last time. And so my communication via text with my players was very impersonal. It was clean. I made sure that I had, some of the powers that be on the chain and on the thread, so everything could be monitored. You see what I mean? And that was how I approached that one. Whether it was good or bad, I guess that's for somebody else who knew me during that time to tell you. But I think that if it wasn't better, at least it was different.
Mm-hmm. And then that your second stint as a head coach also ended with you being fired. We talked about this a little bit in Piedmont a couple weeks back at one of those tournaments.
That's right.
But and I have a couple questions about this, but how did you kind of keep your head up? Like it kind of, like, I would imagine it's probably a little demoralizing, to feel like you received that one setback. You're like, okay, shoot, like I got to kind of reprove myself to some people again, maybe even myself. Mm-hmm. And you reestablish yourself again, you get your feet down, and then you get knocked down again.
Man.
What kind of place were you in after that second, that second firing? Like what was your initial headspace like, and how did you get out of it and move forward?
Dude, I was fragile for a little bit, man, because that one, I actually asked myself that question shortly after, like, okay, now this happened twice. Which one is the worst? Like, once you allow yourself to be in your feelings for however long, but then after you sleep on it, or after you get to the point of acceptance to where it's like, all right, it is what it is, then I started getting introspective, and I'm thinking, which one of these firings stung the worst? And it was the second one. Because, I mean, it's one thing for it to happen one time, like you said. You stumble, you bump your head or whatever, you get back in the saddle, you keep on chugging along. But the second one was consecutive, right? It was one right after another. And I'm like, man, that one hurt me bad, man. Because just to give you a little bit of what I was going through personally at that time, I was 2 weeks away from closing on buying a home. You see what I mean?
Man.
Yeah, man.
You see it all fall apart in front of you.
That's right. I was trying to be a real grown up. And as an adult, you go through those things where you have certain moments that are signature moments to where you prove to yourself that I've arrived as a grown up. And this was going to be one of those for me. And obviously that whole process stopped. You know what I mean? And it was just like, damn. So I lost a job, and then I lost, a potential home. And so I'm sitting up there damn near in tears, like, yo, what do I do? What do I do from this point? And the answers to these questions. You really do.
It's just hard to bring yourself to it.
Yeah, man.
Because it's comfortable to kind of sulk, and
it's
comfortable to get consoled by people. But at the same time, like at what point do you stop looking at, the sunset you wish you could keep looking at in the rear view? When do you focus on the road in front that you have to keep going down? That's true.
So, I picked up the phone, I called my dad, and then I let him know what was happening. And, he said whatever he knew to say to me, whatever he could muster up. I don't remember what those words were. There was something encouraging, as they always are. But, you're just not ready to hear it until you're ready to hear it. And so, man, this happened it was on the 1st of April. And for a moment, I'm like, are you ribbing me? You joking with me? It's April 1st. I didn't say that, but in my mind.
So part of you almost thought it was a joke. You didn't believe it at first, maybe. Maybe it's just a fraction of you?
Nah. No, you know what? Just for the sake of your argument, I'll give you maybe 1%. But going into that meeting.
I feel like it's a pity 1%. We can just wipe that out.
But going into that meeting, I had no idea what was getting ready to happen. Now, in the Piedmont situation, when I got called in, I was initially suspended a couple of days before I got actually fired. So the suspension, that caught me off. That was a left hook out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But then when I got called for the second visit, I knew that it was decision time. Either I'm staying or I'm going.
And you knew both options were probably in play.
Yep. And so I walked, bam, that didn't stagger me like this one did. And so it's like, man, I knew I was not done coaching. I knew, my ego kicked in after a while. I got pride just like anybody else. Like, this is not going to be enough to run me out of the profession. As if I've done all this work for 5 years to strike out 2 times and then I'm done. I was like, no, that can't be me. So I came on back, moved back into the apartment that I just moved out of like 2 months before.
Home sweet home.
Yeah, man, home sweet home. And then, I got a call from Mike Jeffries over at Millwood, the head boys coach. And he was one of the first relationships that I established once I got out here to Oklahoma City that I didn't know before getting out here. He just called me. I don't know how he got my contact information, but he called me way back then and was like, hey, man, if you whatever you need, holler at me. If it's, about where to go, who's who, I got you. And we maintained contact from that point, from 2016 all the way to this point last summer. And he said, man, listen, I know you want to be a head coach again, but I'm making some, my staff is shaking up a little bit. And if you don't land you one as a head coach, I'd love to have you come help me over at Millwood. And I didn't even ponder that one too long. I said, listen, I'm in. Now, obviously in the back of my mind, I knew that if I got an opportunity, to go be a head coach again, even after I committed to helping him.
Yeah, but you got to take care of yourself.
Exactly. I would have looked into it. But I think I was honest with him about that. And he knew that, listen, I mean, I have you long, but while you're available, I'd like to have you. And that says a lot, man, because as a head coach, to hire somebody who's been a head coach, who's aspiring to be one again, that could be dicey, man.
Because you don't know how long they're going to be in it with you.
Well, not even that, because I think that continuity helps or hurts the kids more than it does the head coach. But he knew me, but he didn't know me. So I could be a shyster. I could be somebody that's trying to get in there and bump him. And I could be trying to sabotage to some degree so I can get his job. Like, that type of stuff really happens in this profession. It's sad and it's underhanded as hell, but there are some people who will take a position with that in mind. Now, if you have the idea in mind that, hey man, I'm gonna pay my dues, and if and when he moves on, I hope to be able to slide into that role, I can dig that. But if you're getting in there and you're trying to get him,
trying to supplant, like deliberately do that,
that's low. And so I know some coaches that may or may not want to hire somebody who's been there and done that for those reasons. But he took a chance on me, man, and I think it worked. I think we had us a good time, good season. We didn't get to finish it, because 2020 has been a mess. But I won't complain, because everybody else who had a chance of playing in state suffered the same loss,
So there was only 1 year removed then between you being a head coach, you're an assistant for a year at Millwood, and then now you're back. So
right.
Lots of, not much continuity at all for you over the past 4 years. That's probably shown you that stuff changes like that, and it can change even because when you start, it's like when you're getting married or you're starting a new job, you don't expect it to be something that ends abruptly.
No, man.
No one goes into it expecting, well, maybe, at this point, I'll just get let go and then I'll be moving again.
Right.
So 4 years in a row, your situation changes, your scenario changes. How valuable has it been to just be adaptable and quick to move and, decisive? And do you feel like you've kind of had to just grow in terms of how flexible you are as a person because of that?
Yeah, man. It actually forced me to not be so all about basketball, So with me taking that role as an assistant with Coach Jeffries, that took a lot of responsibilities off my plate, because I didn't have to run the show. I just had to be a part of the show, So a lot of the tedious work that I would have to do when I was at my last two spots, I didn't have to do those things. I was able to decompress a lot quicker, because it wasn't on me. It wasn't on my shoulders, whether we won or we lost. And I'm a competitor like anybody else. I love to win. I don't like to lose either. But I was able to get more sleep at night. I was able to dodge the bullet on some of those parent phone calls, being disgruntled about whatever. I felt good about not having to be the one to make the travel arrangements and handle the paperwork and things of that sort. And with all of that time that I had back, I was able to make more trips home to go see my parents in Tulsa. I was able to focus on I think I was able to be a good teacher too, man, in the classroom. And, give my students more of me, because mentally I wasn't so consumed with the rigors of running a program, and that was a weird feeling for me in the beginning of that school year, because I felt I didn't know what that feeling was. I wasn't able to identify it. I was thinking, okay, am I just all of a sudden lazy? Am I not driven anymore? And but my fire was burning, but differently. You see what I'm saying? I was able to, I had more control of that switch, so I wasn't bringing as much of that home with me as I was before. And maybe I wouldn't have as much if it was more than just me. But me, I live by myself, so there's nobody here to tell me, hey man, you tripping. Or, hey, man, you're thinking about this too much, or you're talking about this too much. Think about something else. Let's watch something else. I just had to figure that out on my own, and it may have taken a little longer than it otherwise would have. But, man, I was more clear-headed about everything during that year at Millwood, because I think I had less on my plate.
I got two more things for you. One's
right.
1A, 1B.
Yeah.
The other one's number 2. 1A, 1B, what's on your bucket list, career-wise and life-wise? Basketball bucket list, coaching bucket list, outside of basketball bucket list.
My basketball bucket list, man, I want to be a state champion.
Of course.
That's what I want to do. I know that's pretty much your standard answer for anybody who's in it. But man, I look at a lot of coaches throughout the state that I have a lot of respect for. And not all of them have titles, but some of the names that come to my mind that I think about when I think about state champions that have been doing it for a long time. I think about Rudy Garcia at Tulsa Union. He's been doing it for a long time, state champion. Eric Savage over at Sand Springs, boys coach, state champion. Bobby Allison, who's at Tulsa Memorial now, state champion. Lenny Burt over at PC West, boys, state champion. You know what I mean? And then on the girls' side, I'm looking at Katie Bass. She's at Mustang now, but she was at Midwest City and then state champion. And actually, when I was at Muskogee, we locked horns against that team, and they beat us to get there to the finals. You see what I'm saying?
In double OT, right?
That's right. And then I'm looking at the age category of some of these coaches when they won it. Like Bobby Allison, like Bobby and Katie, they both are in their 30s like me. And I'm like, okay. So I'm not too young to make this thing happen. You know, so that's on the bucket list to get it done. And life-wise, man, I would love to be multifaceted in terms of the way I make my living. You know what I mean? So wishfully thinking, who says I can't, coach basketball and then have my podcast take off, man? I figure out a way to get some chippers off of that, right? And just be outside anything monetary, because I say that jokingly. I want to be in a space and a place where I know, not just know who's who in the state in this space, but have a relationship with them. To where I can say, yes, I know that guy. Not, yeah, I met him, but I can't tell you anything about him. So that's another beauty of the podcast. I'm getting face to face with folks that I maybe otherwise wouldn't. And at the end of this, I got a friend. So that sounds however it sounds, but that's where I'm at with it.
No, you use corny a lot, but none of that stuff that you said was corny.
Yeah.
In my eyes, none of that's corny.
Right, man. Thank you. Relationships, man. That's where I'm at.
And then number 2, final question. What would you say to any players who would potentially come across this podcast that you're about to be coaching? They go on Facebook or they go on whatever. Right. They see the pod, say, oh, coach is the guest of his own podcast. Like, what would you say to any of your guys who might have pressed play 50 minutes ago or however long we've been going? What would you say to those guys?
Man, I would say that truth always has the advantage. So honesty, man, that doesn't go out of style. Because a lot of time, I'll give you an example. When I was going in those rooms, sitting in those interviews after the Piedmont situation, I knew that they knew about how my stint ended, because they call you references. They talk to the people in the community. They get an idea of who they're bringing in there. But a lot of times it's just a test to see how transparent you're going to be, what character you have. But when you hit them first and you tell them everything bit by bit, shamelessly, looking them right in the face, owning everything, they don't expect that. They don't. They expect you to be either elusive, evasive, or very, very not detailed, because it's like embarrassing under normal circumstances. But what I would do is I would go in there as soon as they say, all right, Mr. Daniels, tell me about yourself. I lead with that. And I try to answer whatever potential questions that they have, so that when I finish talking, we're done with that conversation for the rest of this interview. And it's
already out of the way.
It's truth, man.
It's not the elephant in the room that they're waiting to address at the end. You're just getting it out, and then you're owning up to anything as well. That's
it. Listen, man, because everybody in that room knows that everybody else in that room knows what happened. All right, so let's talk about it. Let's get it out of there. And at the end of the day, because I go through this as a man sometimes, whenever I'm trying to, if I catch myself being too nice or being too censored around somebody, I get to thinking, medicine's nasty straight, but it gets the job done a lot quicker than if you cut it. You know what I mean? When you mix it, it takes a little longer to have its effect. I'll just give you that analogy. And at the end of the day, what are you going to do? You going to get grounded just because you told the truth? Or even though somebody didn't like it? Or somebody going to whoop you? Let's just get it done, man. So truth, man. It's going to
happen at some point.
Truth has the advantage always. So youngsters, if you're watching this, man, just be honest, dog. Be honest with yourself first, then you can be honest with everybody else. And I think they'll appreciate it.
All right, that's all I got for you, man.
My man, thanks a lot, brother.
Hey, I learned a lot.
Thank you, bro. I learned a lot from you as well.